I am a field biologist with the Voyageurs Wolf Project, which studies wolves both in Voyageurs National Park and a pretty good area south of the park. And that's largely just because there's more access to the different things that we do in that area. I've been doing this is my 9th year doing this. And how I got here, I honestly stumbled into this. I was a biology major in college, and normally when you're a biology major in college, to get into grad school, which is usually the next step to becoming a biologist, you basically take whatever field work you can get and hope that turns into something, and you accumulate field work knowledge and those kind of experiences and those things, and eventually, hopefully, some advisor takes you on as a master's student. And so I honestly would have studied squirrels, I would have studied dragonflies, I would have studied anything, but I had a friend who was just a technician here with the Park Service, stumbled into his master's doing, they told him, you have to study beavers, but you can study anything about beavers in Voyageurs National Park, and he said, how do wolves kill beavers? And so that's how my friend Tom Gable, who is the project lead, got started here, and then that technician position turned to his master's on wolves and beavers, and I was a year behind him in school, and he said, I need a volunteer to help me do my field work, and you're looking for experience, so I came up here as a volunteer in 2015, and that just turned into, we did a full season of studying wolf predation on beavers, and that was super successful. And then his advisors were saying, well, this went really well. As you're finishing up, does anyone else happen to want to continue this work? And I was sitting there having just had a full summer of experience here, and I said I would do it, and I did my master's on wolf predation on fawns in the area. And then as I was finishing up my master's, Tom Gable started his PhD, so there was a little more funding for the project to continue. At that time, it was really just a Park Service initiative, and then as his PhD started going on for a while, and there's a decent amount of funding with the PhD, that kind of spawned the Wolf Project as it is now, because his PhD was through the University of Minnesota. We kind of outgrew the size and scope of the Park Service's wolf study, and that's how the Voyageurs Wolf Project kind of was born, totally organically. Every year we've been here, we've said, do you think we could do this another year? And every year it's happened, and the funding's been there. So that's kind of why we're still here. So tonight I'm just hoping to explain kind of the basics of what I do and how we study wolves in this area. I've got a lot of little props here, and hopefully don't let me forget any of them.
Be careful, teachers steal.
I'll know. Some of these things are particular, and endangered species things are of high importance. I've got to keep track of them. So the basics of what I do is, and when I say it's the royal we, there's a crew of anywhere from 6 to 7 seasonal field crew that come to us every summer. And by summer we mean the ice-free season here, so April till November. They are just out of undergrad. I'm looking for that same experience I was looking for, and they come up here. And then we have anywhere from 2 to 3 graduate students also working at some different amount of time here. Sometimes they have to go back to school, some they're during the summer. And then we have 2 winter field technicians that basically just maintain our grid of trail cameras, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the basics of what everyone is doing this summer is following wolves around. And so what I'm largely going to explain is how do we follow wolves around and what are we looking for when we do that. So following a wolf around all starts with probably the ugliest thing I have with me today. Has a lot of perceptions about it and misconceptions about it. But to catch wolves who don't want to be caught, you have to somehow sedate them to get a collar on them. And like I said, wolves don't want to be caught, and really there are 2 ways to catch a wolf. A wolf will not walk into a cage trap or something like that. They're way too wary of that. And so there's really 2 ways that researchers currently immobilize wolves to collar them, and that is with foothold traps or with helicopter net captures. Helicopter net captures are much more common out west, where you have wide open sagebrush areas, big open fields. Picture Yellowstone, where they, spotting scope wolves from 300 meters away and watch them all day. That's where that's more commonly done. They're darting them from helicopters. But here, in the places you can see about 15 feet in the woods, you might be able to run them out on a frozen lake, but even then they're more inclined to get into thick brush where it's not safe to fly a helicopter, much less net gun wolves. So we're left with this option, which is foothold trapping. There's a long legacy of trapping for lethal fur harvest, and that's with a variety of different traps. But typically canine trapping is done with foothold traps. And the gist of foothold trapping is that you hide a set foothold trap in the ground and somehow lure a wolf to come into that area and step on the pan, which is holding this whole thing open with these springs, and it catches the paw right here, and you have the wolf captured. Typically in instances where you're harvesting that animal for fur, you would stake this to the ground, and the animal would be pegged there until you found it and then killed it. Obviously, we're not interested in hurting a wolf in any way, because a big part of what we do is following a wolf as it would be if it had not been captured or otherwise encountered humans. So there's everything about this setup, as kind of big and dirty as it looks, is meant to help a wolf stay very healthy. So I'll start from the top. These jaws here are rubber padded, so you can see that blackness in there is actually rubber set into the jaws. We have these specially made from a company in Texas, and then you can see there's kind of a zigzag pattern in that rubber. That's the separation of the jaws, and the purpose of that, so the rubber is a little bit softer on their paw, and then that zigzag pattern in there prevents them from sliding back and forth in the trap. Normally lethal traps don't have that, and they often can lacerate themselves on the metal or whatever the jaw is made of. So the jaw is softer, and then that pattern prevents them from sliding back and forth. So that keeps the paw really secure. From there, and in this chain there are at least, I think there's 5 in this one, but at least 4 swivels, so that when the wolf is captured, it is not twisting its shoulder or its leg or its wrist in any way. So they have free movement while they're caught in the trap. About a foot down is an impact spring, so when the wolf first is caught, it'll be running away with this, and it'll start slowly getting caught up in things, and this prevents any really hard hitting stops on its shoulder. And then again, there's swivels throughout that. And then on the end of the chain, instead of staking it to the ground, is this drag. And so, like I said, this chain and this drag is buried under the trap, and then that trap is buried, and usually put a scent to attract the wolf to that area to step on the trap. So it steps on the trap, gets caught, runs off through the woods here while it's frightened, and this slowly gets caught up in thick vegetation here. So instead of the wolf hitting the end of the chain and pounding its shoulder, it'll slowly get through some of this brush, and it'll slowly get caught up, and it slows the wolf down until it's to a stop. And once it's to a stop on different trees and the shrubs around here, it'll start to go in circles, and then it gets shorter and shorter amount of chain until it's about, hopefully about 2 to 3 feet of chain, so it actually can't get that big of a head start. So within 5 minutes, it's caught up, slowed down, and kind of sitting there. And we check these traps at least once a day, if not twice a day. So once a wolf is caught in a trap and we find it there, we have the most sophisticated piece of equipment that I have for this is, I don't have it with me, is actually a broom handle. And the broom handle, this plunger screws onto the broom handle, and the syringe goes on the end of the broom handle plunger, and I put a cocktail of 2 different drugs in here, and because that wolf is all tangled up in vegetation, I get to its back hip and give it a short jab with a 4 to 6 foot broom handle, get it in the back hip, and it'll be asleep in about 5 minutes. There's 2 different types of drugs that we use. One is metabolized by the body, and one of them is metabolized by the liver. That's a safety thing for us. So one the wolf will metabolize and be out of in about a half an hour to, well, probably 45 minutes. The other one, it would be take 24 hours to fully process and come out of. And so when I'm done processing a wolf, I actually have to reverse that second drug so that it immediately pops out of it. And it ideally is coming out of both drugs at the exact same time at about 45 minutes. So I have 45 minutes to do a lot of different things. And this is my capture tackle box. I put ear tags in the ears, and those are mainly for when this collar is no longer on the wolf, that we can still identify it on trail cameras, because this collar, and I'll explain in a minute, eventually will fall off. And those are actually goat ear tags. They're about 2 inches. It's the simplest thing, and it works really well. And they have high retention rate. Bigger ear tags will get chewed out by other wolves and that kind of thing. And so the wolf is down. I'm getting hair sample for genetics, a hair sample for isotopes. Basically, you can tell what a wolf has eaten by its hair. You can test the chemical signatures in its hair that are coming into the hair as it grows. So I can tell, oh, it ate this proportion of beaver, this proportion of deer, this proportion of hair, that kind of stuff, just from the hair sample. I'm taking a blood sample for genetics and disease, morphometric measurements of everything, the legs, the length, the head, everything like that.
Justin, is there a needle on that?
No.
Okay, you're scaring me to death. I couldn't
No,
see.
I didn't load it up.
Thanks. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, good question. And those are the basic things we're getting from the wolf. A lot of the things we take from the wolf we aren't using right now, but if we're making that wolf go through the trouble of being caught and immobilized, we want to take anything that we could possibly, not too invasively take from the wolf, so that one day if someone wonders, I wonder on average how big a wolf's paw size is. We don't use that right now, but we have 120 measurements of paw sizes. So we're trying to gain as much as we can as if we're inconveniencing that animal. And of course, the main thing we're there for is to put this GPS collar on it. The top is the GPS, the bottom is the battery. The battery is much heavier, so it stays like this on the wolf. Collars like this have been used roughly, kind of since wolf research began 40 to 50 years ago. But back then, all they had was VHF, which is very high frequency beeping noises. If you ever watch any kind of natural history or research documentary, you see some stoic biologist standing on top of a hill with an antenna listening for a beeping noise and kind of like, what is that? Well, each collar essentially has its own radio station that beeps, and that's the only noise it makes. And so basically that's all researchers had before. So I've got the frequency here on the collar, and so I've put that into this, basically a radio. But how do you turn on a device that, you can't have buttons on this, it'll leak, it'll get water in it, you can't have anything that a wolf can chew on. Well, these collars are turned on and off by just really strong magnets. So this magnet's on essentially a button here, and when I remove it, that basically turns on the collar. It's pretty quiet right now, but you hear that pulse? So if I had, normally you have this whole antenna attached to this. I'm so close to the collar that you can actually hear it without an antenna. So that turns the collar on. And we use that only in rare situations when the collar has failed for different reasons. But back in the day, and back in the day, I mean 25, 30 years ago, that's all that researchers had. And the only way to find the location of a wolf was to listen for it with those antennas, get a general bearing, then go somewhere far away and listen from a different angle, and then do that again. And you could triangulate, maybe 100 square meter area that the wolf probably was. And that would take several hours, depending on access and that kind of stuff. And now this collar will take a location every 20 minutes. It'll upload it to my phone, and I can sit in bed and see where a wolf is every 20 minutes. So you can see with that kind of advantage why a charismatic animal like the wolf, there's still more and more to be found out about it, because the technology is giving us such an ability to learn about these animals. So, before they were getting home ranges of a wolf pack, and you'd get, maybe 100 locations a year from, they had crews just listening for wolves and triangulating them over and over again to get 100 locations. And now this uploads batches of 12 locations every few hours. And I can get that with it wherever there's internet. And I can hopefully have time to show you kind of what that looks like. So that's what this collar does. I mentioned it has battery in the bottom, which batteries are not, they don't go for forever. And so on the side of this collar here are 2 prongs that go into the battery. And at a pre-programmed date, which is roughly a month or 2 before this battery should die, those prongs will release and this collar will flop off. And then it's still giving out GPS locations, and I as a researcher can go pick it up, pop on a new battery, and it's ready for the next wolf, which is handy because this is about $4,000. And so it used to be you put a collar on a wolf and it was on it for its life, because we didn't have drop-off technology. It was just that VHF signal, and the assumption was that it would wear it for the rest of its life. And now we can save a lot of money, and obviously we likely won't catch that wolf again, that it doesn't have to wear the collar for the rest of its life. This collar is our longest lasting collar, and it'll last about 3 years on the animal, and we can remotely drop this off. So we say the wolf leaves the area. We've had wolves go to Wisconsin, we've had wolves go to Duluth, Canada, all sorts of things where they're no longer useful to our research. There's no reason for us to really know where that wolf is, and we'll just trigger the collar to fall off, and it flops off, and away goes the wolf just with ear tags. So that's kind of the program there, and the reason this is all taped up on the bottom is not because it's broken. There's just another magnet on the bottom that triggers the drop off, so I need to take 2 magnets off. So that's the collar in its basic form. We actually are paying essentially like a cellular fee for this, so there's actually a data cost to it. So the $4,000 is just for the device, and we're paying data fees continuously on that. So that's how that works. So now that we have a wolf collared, we have it taking 20-minute locations, and we have it because we don't intensively study wolves in the winter time. The collar on November 1 will switch to taking locations every 6 hours, and that saves the battery so that it will last hopefully longer, more years of the wolf's life, so we can study it longer. I will say, after 9 years of doing this, rarely do we have a wolf collared for 3 full years. Something always happens to it. Even these really dominant, breeding male or female who's got a pack, something will happen to them, or at the very least they will leave the area, and we no longer are studying the animal. There's just a lot of change going on. The life expectancy of a wolf is really dependent in this area. If you are a breeding animal, so that you have your own pack, you're producing pups every year, the life expectancy I'd say is about 9 to 11 or 12. A 12-year-old wolf is super old. But if you don't find a pack, your life expectancy is 2 or 3. Just because you're alone, you don't have a pack to take down deer with, and every territory you're walking through, everyone wants to kill you. So there's a lot of risks for lone wolves, we call them, that don't belong to a pack. Either they're poached, they are hit by cars, they are killed by other wolves, and most commonly is they starve to death, which is just kind of the harsh reality of wolves. It's a really, really hard life. People some people have this perception that wolves are these killing machines, and they're just thriving, and they are getting fat off every sheep and deer and everything like that, and oftentimes they starve to death. The highest cause of pup mortality is starvation. In this area, our average pup survival to 1 year old is 20%. So it's not uncommon for entire litters to be lost, not uncommon for 1 or 2 pups to survive, and then that's survival to 1 year old, and it's very common that by 2 years old that wolf will be a lone wolf. And so after finally making it to 1 to 2 years old, you're kicked off to that lone wolf lifestyle, looking for a territory. Hopefully you find one. In this area, there's not a lot of vacant areas for wolves to go. It's basically pack on pack. If you look at a map we have small maps of the packs in this area, and there are 0 spaces between them, and that probably goes roughly to like Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and to Hudson Bay. that's how it is. There's packs everywhere, except for where there's little pulses of people. But you'd be surprised at how close wolves get to international falls, and how close packs are there. So yeah, we're in a wolfy area, which is why we're here, studying wolves in this area. There's no better place to do it.
How many wolves do you collar a year?
We collared 16 this year, which was our record. They don't want to be caught, and we only have so many collars to put out. And about 15 to 20% of the wolves in a population in this area are lone wolves. So inevitably we catch about 20% of our wolves are lone wolves. We catch them, and within a week they're really far away, and so we don't study those animals. So there's kind of we follow probably 6 to 8 wolves at one time. That just basically the capacity we have to follow wolves wherever they go every 20 minutes. Unfortunately, I have a little laptop, but hopefully you guys can see some of this. This is what the map looks like for my daily work. Every color is a different wolf, and that's about 8 days of them traveling.
Oh, wow.
So most of these are different packs, because we're still studying them because they're still in the area. You know, we're out here on the Capitogama Peninsula, and then you can see it's a lot easier to study wolves south of the park. Oftentimes we don't have any wolves collared on the peninsula itself, just because we catch most of these wolves on roads and trails like logging roads and stuff like that. When we catch them here, we're in little bay corners and on game trails that we find, and we trap for 4 weeks and don't catch anything, and you know, it's just really, really difficult. So a lot of the research we do out here is simply with trail cameras. So like I said, these are all the points connected, 20-minute locations connected by the line in order in which they happen. And so we have a program that takes that data, and whenever there is 2 locations within consecutive locations within 200 meters of each other, the program selects those out of all those moving locations and creates what we call a cluster. So every one of these points on here is that same data, with just those close by points. It could be 2 points or it could be 50 points, but if they're within 200 meters of each other, it extracts those out, and that's basically the bread and butter of what we do. So anywhere that a cluster is put out by a wolf, somebody goes to it, and sees what the wolf is doing there. And so that when I say we follow the wolf, we literally follow them. We're always about a week behind, because of just the time it takes for enough clusters to accumulate that it's worth our time going. In the early days, we would do 2 or 3 day cycles, and we'd go way out to an area, search what happened there, come home, and then the next day would go there again. And then we'd have to go all the way back in there. So we learn about 7 to 10 days is a good cycle to kind of follow the wolves around. So this is like what our technicians are doing on a daily basis. I send out plans, and then oftentimes everybody, including myself, is going to different places that wolves are doing things. That's what I was doing before I came here on the other side of the lake. I was just seeing what a wolf did on 3 different places along the lakeshore on the other side of the lake there. That's how we're getting what they're killing, how many things they're killing, where they're killing them, how often they're killing them, what are they doing once they've killed that animal. Do they bring it back to their pups right away? Do they wait 3 hours and then bring it back to their pups? Do they go kill something else first and then bring the second kill to their pups? All that information accumulated over 5 to 8 wolves over years is the kind of what we're looking for. Like I said, wolves are a really charismatic animal, so there's been a lot of studies on wolves. What makes this study different is not only the frequency at which the fine scale data that we have, but also that maybe you guys have had a pleasant experience here on the lake, but if you're in the middle of the woods in June here, it's just relentless. It's humid, it's 80, and the mosquitoes are just carrying you away, and then the flies and ticks. So it's a really miserable place to study wolves. That's just part of it. And also in this vegetation, it's really hard to see a lot more about those wolves because they can spot scope them from half a mile away, watch the pups come out of the den, see what the breeding female brings back to them, and it's all quite simple. But here, we don't have that advantage. except for in the in the winter, where you can fly a plane over. When a deer is killed by a wolf pack here, it looks like kind of like it exploded in the snow. So it's really obvious. You can say, oh, there's 5 wolves eating this deer, and then you fly around and follow the tracks in the snow, and that's how research is done for most of the time in like northern Minnesota areas. In the summer, instead of traveling around as a pack, the pack splits up within their territory and they travel around as individuals. And they're trying to find smaller prey to bring back to the breeding female when she's lactating, or the pups when they start eating meat. And so instead of traveling around as a pack, they're all split up, they're all doing their own thing, and they're all just kind of going back to the central point, which is the den site. And so very little is known in this environment with this prey base about how wolves do that. Say in Yellowstone, they're still eating an elk calf is still a big animal, but a deer fawn, a wolf can kill and eat a deer fawn and carry half of it away in 25 minutes. When a deer fawn is born, it's roughly the size of an adult snowshoe hare. So you can imagine when even these GPS collars could take a location every hour. That was a huge advancement, that they could take a location every hour. You could never study deer fawn predation because you would never find the kill sites, because even if they were there for an hour, you would have no way of knowing where they'd paused, because our locations would just look like a travel corridor when they actually had paused for 40 minutes to eat the fawn, pick up half of it, and bring it back to the pups. So that's kind of the difference, and that's why our study has something to study that's unique here, is because it's really thick. The prey that they're eating most of the summer, when it's especially thick, are beavers and fawns. And then those two things are really not well understood because they're so hard to identify kill sites and study where they kill them, how often they're killing them, and that kind of stuff. And previous to really when I started my master's on wolf predation on fawns, the most that people had found fawn kill sites in studies was like under 15 kill sites for an entire study, and we just surpassed 700 fawn kill sites. So we've really capitalized on the technology in this environment and really tried to hone in on that. So when we're at kill sites, or when we're searching for clusters, really we're just honing in on little bits of disturbed vegetation, using GPSs in our phones to kind of find where those points are on the landscape. And we're just looking for the teeniest little thing. At beaver kill sites, a skull would be like a super obvious thing to find. Normally, we find maybe a little shred of bone and a couple pieces of beaver fur, and usually the stomach contents. Basically, the stomach contents and the hard palate of a beaver are the two things they don't eat. So there's very, very little left at these kill sites to find. So we spend over 2 months training our crew members before we trust them to even go out and find these kill sites, because like I said, when a wolf can eat a fawn in 25 minutes, there's often just like a tuft of hair or a bit of tissue on the underside of a leaf in this environment to prove that they killed something there. So it's taken a lot of training, it takes a sharp eye, and invariably we probably miss some things, but we've cued in on different things over time to really help us identify kill sites. When they're not killing fawns and beavers in this environment, which is basically right now, they're not killing very many things right now, because fawns at about 8 weeks old or older can have a chance at outrunning a wolf, so they're a lot harder to catch now. Before that, they're relying on just being invisible. They lie motionless. They don't usually run, and wolves are adept at finding them still, but they're kind of sitting ducks until they're about 8 weeks old. Now they're running away, so they're harder and harder to catch. Beavers are primarily eating aquatic vegetation right now, so they're eating lily pad tubers and other things like that, other aquatic tubers, so they're rarely coming on land. If a beaver's not on land, it's not vulnerable. That's the only time they're vulnerable. When they're on land, they're super vulnerable because they're kind of this defenseless potato waddling on. They have a pretty good bite, but a wolf, is quick and has a really, really strong bite too. So when beavers are in the water, they're really, really safe, and so right now they're really not that vulnerable because they're mostly eating those aquatic vegetation. And then adult deer are in their prime. They've been eating really good veg all summer. They're thriving. There's no deep snow to slow them down. They're strong, and the wolves are traveling around by themselves. So those are even harder to catch. So what do you eat when there's nothing to catch? Well, the only thing that's plentiful right now is blueberries. So that's why right now we see wolves going to the high rock tops in this area, hunkering down, flopping down in blueberry patches and eating blueberries continuously.
Wow.
I could actually probably show you. We kind of joke that we don't have to look for blueberries, the wolves look for the blueberries for us. You can see here, this is just the cluster locations. That star in the center there of all those locations, where all the lines leading to it is a blueberry patch.
Wow.
So they're coming and going. Maybe they make a little foray around their territory to maybe look for a beaver or something like that, but really they're just hunkering down that right there. And right now they're bringing their pups to those places too, and so pups are just eating blueberries. We had actually proven that wolves will actually bring blueberries back to their pups, which was something I actually witnessed. A wolf regurgitating blueberries to its pups, which was a really chance encounter in itself. But that proved that blueberries actually might have some value to wolves. Their guts are certainly not set up to digest vegetation. They're meat eaters, but that suggests that at least they consider that a food worthy of bringing back to their pups, has some value. It's not just purely a starvation food, but we'd love to do that kind of analysis of what they're actually able to extract out of that. If you find a scat in the woods right now, it's likely to be stocked full of blueberries. And not to be gross, but some of those blueberries look like they look perfectly edible still. They're like they pass through the whole gut of a wolf, completely unchanged, and look totally delicious still. They're in a scat, so they're not. But and we've done some collaboration with another college that shows that blueberry seeds that pass through the gut of a wolf are actually more viable. So they are actually spreading blueberry seeds by eating blueberries. But basically anywhere on the Canadian Shield like this where there's abundant blueberries, wolves are almost certainly eating them, which is really interesting alongside bears. And they're also eating raspberries, Juneberries, blackberries, those kind of things. So they're really queuing in on that food source. Wolves can taste, so there's probably an element of it being sweet. The other thing, kind of starvation food that wolves are eating starting actually a few days ago, is bear bait piles. Bear hunting is a huge recreation in this area, where you put out piles of candy corn, piles of old donuts, liquid smoke, all sorts of stuff like that to bait in wolves, bait in bears actually. And wolves are opportunistic. There's candy corn and molasses and old bacon sitting in a pile. They will absolutely eat that. So I am about to start working on basically mapping all the bear bait piles in this area, because if I know where a bear bait pile is, I don't have to send a technician to it to see what the wolf did there. And so that's another food source that isn't so sexy as a beaver or a fawn or something like that, but they're actually eating kind of garbage. And that's a huge food source on the landscape. And when you consider why I said it started a few days ago, August 11 is the beginning of when you may start baiting for I think it's the September 10 start of the season. But in places like Wisconsin, there's no limit on how long you can bait. So that's a food source that's almost year round. Obviously they're not baiting in the winter as much, but basically the ice-free season, there's bear bait on the landscape. So that's a huge food source for wolves that you might not think of. And other places where that's not allowed, that is a food source removed. So that's another thing they're eating right now. And as blueberries go away, and as bear hunting season kind of comes to an end, is right about when beavers start trouncing on land, because they need to prepare their dams for winter, and they need to build a food cache, and that's primarily woody vegetation, so they have to come on land again to start gnawing trees down and building that cache. And then right as that is kind of peaking, the rut starts. And a distracted deer is a very easy deer to catch. Not easy deer, but a distracted deer during the rut is a lot easier to kill than in its prime deer. And so both male and female deer are distracted during that time, and suddenly we see this pulse of adult deer kills. And that also coincides with when the pups are finally big enough to actually travel with the parents. And so you have this rejoining of the pack unit in November. They start killing deer again, and and then they travel together until the pups are born the next spring. So that's kind of the cycle of what they're doing and what we're studying. In the winter, we're studying basically that pack unit to see, one, how many pups are still alive. And still alive, I mean, earlier in the season in the spring, we go to the dens. We can only find a den if we already have a wolf collared. It's quite obvious, similar to the star pattern of the Blueberry Hill where a den site is from a collared wolf. We go there, we extract the pups, give them a microchip similar to what you give your pet, like a grain of rice sized chip. And the purpose of that is so if we catch a wolf in a foothold trap, 2 years later we scan every wolf and, oh, this wolf was born in this den 3 years ago. We know it's probably a pack member because it's still in the territory. Or, oh, this wolf was born 3 years ago, 4 territories over, it's almost certainly a lone wolf. So we use that information. But the biggest thing we're getting when we go to those dens is a number of pups, because we want to know it started at 6 pups. By fall, when they started running around again, it was 4 pups, and by the end of the winter, it was 2 pups. So those are all markers of pup survival and pup recruitment to different ages. So that's a big piece of information that we're getting, and that's why all winter we have at least 200 trail cameras set out throughout the study area, usually on travel corridors like snowmobile trails and logging roads and that kind of thing, basically to just get repetitive counts of the pack. We want to know how many members there are, how many pups are still alive, how many of the members are non-breeding individuals. That's kind of an interesting thing we're looking at, because when there's small prey around, their packs are actually a lot smaller because there's not as much food to go around. So the average pack size here is about 4 to 6 animals, which is a lot different than, say, Yellowstone or Grand Teton, where you have these packs of 15, but they're pulling down bison, elk, moose, and the calves of those animals are much bigger, and that's a year-round food source for them. So we have a lot smaller pack, so how big the pack is through the winter is an important indicator of how much food the breeding female is getting, which impacts how many pups she'll have, and you can see how this kind of cycle repeats itself year after year. So that's kind of what we're doing. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, and I'm sure you guys have some questions, but yes, I already have.
So there are 13 of us staying here.
Okay.
In 7 tents. Which one of us is closest to a wolf during the night?
A collared wolf or a wolf?
Either.
Whoever's on probably the lake edge here.
Okay, so here we're
You're-
okay.
Yeah,
The closest to the lake edge. Whose
Is
tent
us.
is that?
That would be you,
Oh, that's
Dacia.
me. and Colleen.
And all of our ambassadors, yeah.
Yes. Trust me, the wolves are terrified of you. Like I said, we go to the dens. If you can imagine going near a bear, they don't really have dens with their cubs as much, but we go into these wolf dens and they know we're there. They're kind of usually 200, 300 meters away, circling. You can kind of hear their feet in the leaf litter. But never once have I even been remotely approached by a wolf at their own den holding their pups. So they're totally different mindset than like, say, a grizzly bear or something like that. And that's probably because, to some extent, they have this becoming a pretty long evolutionary history with humans as something to be feared. So there's studies that go on in Ellesmere Island, way up above the Arctic Circle, where they can study Arctic wolves, and they will stand as close as I am to the fire pit from the den entrance and watch the pups interact with the parents, because those wolves have no fear of people. It's not a threat. They don't have this history with people as a threat. I can't say that's exclusively why wolves are afraid of people here, but that seems to be a part of it. That there's this innate fear, but they are terrified of people, and if there's anyone who would ever be attacked by a wolf, it would be me and my crew, who are going everywhere a wolf goes, to their food, to their dens, to their rendezvous sites. Everywhere they go, a week behind them, but often we're stumbling, into a kill that they're not quite finished with and that kind of stuff. If anyone would be attacked, it's us. We carry pepper spray for bears and, for most importantly, people, because we're in remote locations by ourselves. So, yeah. So you're totally safe. Yeah.
What if you capture one that you have already collared before? You just let it go then?
Depends. It's rare. If it is had its collar for any amount of time, we'll just put a fresh collar on it.
Okay.
That's a real boon for us. If it's something that would be very interesting for us that we don't often have the opportunity is to study a wolf whenever we first capture it through the end of its life. So once in a while, it happened once this year where we recaptured a wolf. Actually, we recaptured a wolf wearing its collar months before it would fail or die. So that was really a really good thing for us because we'll be able to study that wolf for the life of 2 collars, essentially. So, yep.
How heavy is the collar? That looks so heavy. Like,
Yeah. So that's a good.
Get out of it. Like,
That's a good question. We don't have a lot of evidence that they gnaw on it a little bit. I think mostly because it's just plastic and on their neck. I mean, other wolves gnaw on it, but we don't ever have an issue with them really like chewing through the belting, which they could easily do. But this is our bigger collar. That has a bigger battery that lasts longer. We have another one that has essentially a third less battery life. But we will never collar wolf where the collars, our limit is 4% of its body weight. So we have a specific stipulation, and we have oversight from the university about what we can do to wolves and what we can't do to wolves. And so there's been several instances where we've caught a wolf and it was too small for a collar and we release it.
I was thinking that. I mean, does it upset them when they go to sleep? Like that thing that's sticking out, like, does that?
I don't think so. They
Okay.
It's enough to not swing freely, but it is enough to come to the side when they do lay down. Oftentimes we'll see when a wolf is like, we put bait down in front of a lot of our cameras and they will roll on them, and you can see that the collar can move
Okay.
freely. It's not so tight that it is kind of an art to put it on the right tightness. You don't want it obviously to be able to slip it off, but you don't want it to be able, obviously too tight to be choking it in any way, which we've never had any issue with that. But fitting it is kind of an art. And when we do get wolves that are killed from other reasons that are wearing a collar, we always investigate, does it have any injuries from this collar? Has it, had any issues? And we have had other collar brands that we've just quit altogether because we weren't happy with the way it sat and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, as far as we can tell from any evidence we have, this really doesn't affect them that much because it's a percentage of their body weight that's pretty light for a wolf.
We talked last night about stories and how important stories are, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would be your most interesting wolf story?
Wolf story.
Yeah.
Oh man, been doing this a long time. I would say just instances where I've encountered wolves by accident. The time that I said I witnessed wolves regurgitating blueberries to their pups, so a rendezvous site, for those of you that don't know, once the pups are old enough to not be contained in a hole, when they're kind of mobile enough and they would leave the hole anyway, they start congregating just at a central site, which is called a rendezvous site, where all the wolves are still returning, but it's just kind of usually in an open beaver meadow or something like that. I was going to a rendezvous site to investigate after they had left, thought they had left, but pups are super gullible, and so I howled as I approached just to make sure they weren't there, and all the pups erupted and started howling. I was 100 yards away from the site. They all erupted and thought I was a wolf, so they all came running over to me, running around me. Seeing what I was the first human they've ever seen. And then they ran back out into the meadow that I could see, and apparently that adult had been far enough away not to know that I was there. And then the adult came out and regurgitated blueberries to them.
Wow.
So that ended up being, a scientific publication, just the chance encounter like that.
That's a pretty cool story.
So thanks.
It just makes me think the adult was probably in, wolfish saying, "Don't talk to strangers."
Or at least humans.
You must have a pretty good howl.
You'd be surprised. I could howl, but you'd be surprised at how gullible it. I like to say you have to have the right tenor and all this stuff. And wolves, especially wolf pups, will howl at a lot of things. So one of the things, if we don't have a collar on a pack, but we want to know where its home sites are, rendezvous site or den sites, we'll do what's called a howl survey. And that's kind of the old-fashioned technique where you howl and then the wolves respond from their den site. And then you basically do the triangulation thing. You get them to respond, get a bearing with a compass, go to somewhere else, howl again, they howl back, and you can get a triangulation of where their home site is.
Austin, you do realize you're now going to howl.
I can howl.
Okay.
You want me to do it
Yes.
as I leave?
Yes,
Or-
I do.
Wait, Steve's
Yes.
not here with the kid. Oh, it's running. Perfect.
Oh, okay.
You want me to howl right now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, ready?
Yeah. We're ready.
He's way better than we are.
You guys are safe. You can leave your food out now. Oh yeah, that's the key. Because oftentimes, in some areas, we'll get coyotes to respond, and they're much more yippy and short. So
Now you freaked out the cussing camp.
So we have like coyotes to get our campers back into our places.
Yeah.
That though.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
I feel
Yeah.
like we can aspire.
just gotta hold it as long as you can.
Oh, wow.
I do honestly this time of year. We don't have collars on this pack right here, but there's a fair chance that they would respond if they were within about 500 meters. A human can hear them respond 2 kilometers away. A wolf can hear 10 kilometers, but you would hear them respond. You could howl from here and they would respond, and you might not hear it if they were 4 kilometers away. But if they were close by, which they could be, like I said, there's packs everywhere here. You're in a pack territory here. The pups are, like I said, they respond sometimes to ambulances, and like they're super gullible. And normally what happens is you howl, the pups start going because they're gullible, and then the adults chime in because they hear that.
How long do wolves usually howl? I mean, I was surprised at how long you howled.
Yeah, I mean it varies. That's the long kind of drawn out
Yeah.
howl noise is usually what gets them to respond, but it's highly variable. The pups kind of sound like coyotes. They kind of yip and they're high pitched. Sometimes you'll get these long, low howls like I did, but it's really variable by individual.
Did you take a class
Did I take a class?
on that?
Learn how
No,
to
I
howl.
didn't.
Self-taught.
Just been doing it a long time. Listen to a lot of wolves howl back.
So do you have a family?
Yeah, I live at. Anyone know where Ray is? It's kind of. No. It's a no. Why would you know where Ray is? It's a one business town, kind of on the way to I Falls. But my wife and I live there.
Do you have kids?
Nope, just my wife and I and a dog and 26 chickens.
I'm just thinking, if kids ever come, my dad's a wolf guy. Nobody's
Yes,
gonna mess
yeah.
with-
Obviously, the wolves don't care about an international border. During the winter, that they go back and forth across.
Yeah, things totally change once the lake freezes. Wolves will definitely swim. They'll swim this lake, not frequently, but normally the lake is in itself a territory border. But in the winter, especially around mating season, which is January, February, the borders kind of become loose and everyone's testing different borders. So, the wolves on the peninsula will go up into Canada briefly and come back, and wolves, the packs here will go down there and vice versa, and they often will chase deer out onto these islands. Deer are super vulnerable on ice, and so they chase them out on the islands. The deer start going to the islands, and then they can kill them out there. So yeah, it really shifts once there's ice.
Can they sense the ice melt and come home before it melts?
Yeah, I imagine they can. I mean, it's interesting with the collar locations, when you know what the ice is like and you can see the location still on the ice. Wolves we've got a lot of videos of, we put a lot of cameras on beaver dams, and the ponds freeze up right to the dam edge, but then the first thing to melt is where that water is flowing over the dam, and I'm always shocked at how close they walk right up to the edge. Somehow they can tell that they're not going to fall through, and you can see them test it, and they're a lot, in some ways, like dogs in that way. They kind of have that personality. Yeah.
So some of us are big followers of you on Instagram, your stuff, and I know back when you were doing your fundraiser, I bought you a beer.
Thank you.
Yeah, but the information you get from the other animals, do you report that out to the bear dudes or the beaver dudes?
Not so much. I mean, all that video data is kept, so you know, we catalog all our video data. It's handy for social media, but every single video we get, which is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of videos, 200 cameras taking a picture of any animal that walks by it. One of the rainy day jobs of our crew is to go through and catalog, you know, marten, scent marking, deer, walking, you know, we catalog all of that. So in theory, if someone was interested, you know you have this backlog of weasel data in the park, you know, we have these questions, you know, that we're not actively like, you know, selling that necessarily, but it exists if someone did want to use it. Yeah.
Do y'all work in a vacuum, or do you communicate with other wolf studiers?
I mean, we certainly communicate, and we'll collaborate for different broader questions. We just released a paper with 5 other national parks, kind of on the effect of basically the idea that even in national parks there's got to be a border, and there's inevitably wolves that go across back and forth that border into a protected area, into a non-protected area. And that protection can mean they're just in a national park and they're out of a park, and they're much more likely to be poached or hit by a car outside of a park. Or in some areas, you know, there's illegal harvest. Like out west, they can, you know, leave a national park and wander into a cattle area where they can be killed, that kind of stuff. And so is there an effect? Are those packs less stable on the borders of areas? And so we do collaborate with other people like that. A lot of what we do in Minnesota, we're kind of, one of our advantages is that we're one of the only studies I know of that's not an agency. We're not state, we're not federal, we're through the University of Minnesota, but they have no real say besides maybe the rules of what we can collar and how we can collar. So that's why our social media is successful, is because we can say what we want. And we're not afraid of the backlash that would come back to the National Park Service, say if we were through the National Park Service or something like that, which has a huge advantage for us to be able to share what we find, the good, the bad, and ugly. You know, for example, you would very rarely see an agency post something about a wolf that got poached, and we're free to say, yep, we followed this wolf for 3 years and it was shot. You know, and that's the honest truth about what happens to wolves, and we kind of can weather the. I don't know if you've ever read our comments on Facebook, but they're kind of a dumpster fire sometimes, but that is engagement with the topic, and we think that's really positive. So yeah, that's kind of how we handle that.
When we first got here, we got to meet with the park superintendent, and he said that Voyageurs is the only national park that has wolves that hasn't had them reintroduced. They've always been here.
Correct.
So what makes it special, you know?
What makes here special? By the time they were protected, that's it. We're close enough to the Canadian border, which, you know, is a huge, low population of people, huge source of wolves, and so it is special that they were never extirpated from here. But the only reason that is true is because essentially there weren't that many people here by the time the Endangered Species Act came around. There was, I've talked to many locals here who were hot to get the bounty, hot to, you know, kill the wolves, and, you know, so it was just that there was enough coming out of Canada, in my opinion, you know, that they were not extirpated.
So most of the wolves here are related to Canadian wolves? Or?
Yeah, generally. This is considered the Great Lakes subspecies, and so they're different than Western Rocky Mountain wolves, and they're still a gray wolf, but they're a different subgroup, kind of. These wolves are generally quite a bit smaller. Our average female is about 60 pounds. Our average male is about 70 pounds. Out there, it's not uncommon for them to be over 100 pounds. But they still seem formidable with a winter coat on, but they're a lot smaller. Yeah.
I've read recently that some of the deer around Grand Canyon have kind of learned the boundaries of that park and tend to stay within the park, and therefore they don't get shot during hunting season and such. Do you see similar behavior with wolves or even any of the other animals with Voyageurs? They kind of know
I would say
here, not safe here.
Certainly the deer know where people are for kind of a halo rainy lake,
Right.
And then Canada. The southern border, I would say there's too few people here for them to really maybe cue in on that as much. I'm sure once there's hunters in the woods, it's more just human scent that keeps deer in or out. But I would say for wolves, I think their territorial needs trump their fear of humans. So, for example, they can't just limit their border. They can't cut their pack territory in half because they know where the park. Even if they could perceive the park border, that would be half their food. That they need a certain amount of area to provide a certain amount of food for their pups. So I don't think they would necessarily cue in on that. And actually, we see wolves use it's. As much as the deer kind of cue in on the safety of human structures, the wolves also cue in on that. So in the town of Cabotogama, there's a lot of people will feed the deer in the winter, and the perception there is that they're helping the deer get through the harsh winters here by giving them some food. And I always say their deer feeders are a wolf feeder, because as soon as the deer wander just out of sight of those houses, and then the same thing happens with those deer are super healthy because they make it through the winter, and maybe they'll have twins or triplet fawns instead of just one fawn. And come fawn drop on average here is about May 26th, and you can just watch it like clockwork. All the wolves head to just south of Cabotogama and start eating fawns. So pros and cons there. I'm sure a few more get through than would have otherwise, but the wolves are actually recognizing where the human halos are and using them. You'd be surprised at how close the wolves get to some of the cabins around here. They're never seen because it's at 2 a.m, but yeah.
So you guys just released a story about brothers that you're following.
Yes.
And one went into the swamp area where one went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
What are you hoping to learn from them, or what have you learned from them?
Yeah, good question. So it's just rare for us, because of the way pack structures are around here with, you have this, usually you have a breeding pair, and you have the pups of the year are kind of the pack unit, and then maybe 1 or 2 pups that stuck around from the previous year. Yearlings around here are kind of like that college student who's living in their parents' basement, who's like, the parents are kind of like, all right, we're feeding our new pups, like, go on. That's why they usually disperse around here, because there's such a small food source, beavers and fawns. So it's rare that we get a yearling or 2 wolf. Obviously the breeding pair aren't going to be siblings. So it's rare that we have yearling wolves and we collar both of them and they stick around. So it's basically just the rarity of it is learning what it looks like for yearling wolves who are siblings, because it's just such a rare subset to study in packs that are only 4 to 6. So we're just basically seeing how often they, what we're learning right now is how often they visit each other's kills, how often they visit their parents' kills, because we also in that pack we have the breeding female collared. So it's really interesting to see, we consider when a wolf visits a kill site that it is its kill, but knowing full well that could be another wolf's kill. But we have no way of proving that usually, and so it's really, we want data on, these brothers visit that breeding female's kills 50% of the time, so our estimates on yearling kill rates are probably high, that kind of stuff. So that's what we're kind of actively learning. Unfortunately, these yearlings, they don't do very much. They're pretty, as far as predation goes, they're boring. As far as information, they're fascinating. But they often don't do very much. We actually had 3 siblings collared in that pack, and one of them starved to death. So which is interesting, because now we had 3 yearlings who didn't disperse in their pack, and we knew the number of pups. And so you can say, well, 3 stuck around, this is what they were eating during that time, and one of them wasn't eating very much. None of them are eating very much, but one of them starved to death. Yeah.
What is average litter size for a pup?
On average, it's about 6. We've had I've seen as low as 2 and as high as 9.
And what's its survival rate?
About 20%. So it varies a lot by year. It's been, because they're constantly growing, so they need more and more and more food at a time right now where there's less and less and less and less food. So there's this bottleneck in August where if pups can make it to essentially September, when beavers start going on land. There's a chance of catching an adult deer. That's kind of the bottleneck here. But we have lots of depressing footage of basically starving pups kind of wandering around. But it's kind of that's what limits the wolf population, and the wolf population limits the deer population, and that's what the kind word limiting actually means. Fawns dying and wolf pups starving.
You used a word that one of our other presenters had used this week. You said the Canadian shield.
Yes.
I've never heard that phrase. I don't know what that means.
Okay, so we're at the southern edge of the Canadian Shield. The Canadian Shield, in a sense, is this look of like open granite, basically this. From here to about Hudson Bay, the ecosystem looks very similar. You have this kind of boreal forest with open rock slopes, and that's like some of the oldest exposed rock on the planet. It's like 4 billion years old or something like that. But it's basically that geologic area of North America is considered the Canadian Shield, where it's characterized by boreal forests on like stripped down rock. Basically the glaciers cleared everything off here, smoothed all the rock over, and then we're seeing what finally has regrown on bare rock over 10,000 years. So that we're at the southern edge, and you have a lot of deciduous trees, so a little less boreal here. But technically, I mean, if you go just like an hour towards North Dakota from here, it totally changes. Where it's much more prairie-like, oak savanna kind of feel, and we're right at the edge of this kind of rocky island, slope, blueberry hill kind of area.
Would Superior National Forest be part of that, Sheila?
It's right on the edge, yeah. So both.
Thank you.
Any questions?
You're like the coolest person I've met.
Wow.
I know Moss is pretty
I was
cool.
going to say, I was thinking that this morning.
We had our
So cool.
our foraging today, and now we're talking about wolves and everything. Pretty cool.
Yeah, very interesting.
So do you guys interact with like the Ely and the wolves there and the?
Yeah, well,
Center.
it's kind of interesting that so that project recently ended. The wolf, there's obviously still the wolf centers there, but the 50 plus year study out of Ely recently ended. We got a lot of their stuff for free, which is handy. Yeah. But Tom, who leads the project, he actually trapped for them. That's where he learned to wolf trap, is through the Ely group. So they're very similar to us in that they're studying, wolves in the ecosystem. But because they were kind of ending as we were kind of ramping up, we kind of looked at different things. They were much more focused on just pack dynamics and like kind of winter stuff. So their bread and butter was when nobody knew anything about wolves, and they were the ones flying around seeing wolves from there, and they were getting the first numbers on, they killed this many deer in a winter and that kind of stuff. And so they weren't, for different reasons, transitioning as much to like the 20-minute collar stuff, and Dave Meach is 85, so that study is kind of wrapping up. Dave Meach is like the godfather of wolf biology. He's still,
Wolfman.
He's still, yeah, he still has an office at the U. He's kind of an amazing guy. But that was his study out of Ely, Minnesota, and he started studying wolves technically in the 50s. So he's been at it for a long time.
When wolves are reintroduced to an area, are they just caught somewhere else and released?
Generally, yeah. So, and in this day and age, it's a lot different than it even was in '95 when they reintroduced the Yellowstone. But normally they get wolves from similar or the same subgroup. So, for example, they released wolves on Isle Royal. The things they wanted there were Great Lakes subspecies, so then we're going to release 115-pound western wolves on Isle Royal. But they also wanted wolves that had experience or could have had experience taking down large prey. So we have, there's only moose on the island as far as ungulate deer-like things. So this area would have been a horrible place to take wolves from for that because I think in 9 years we've documented 2 moose kills. There are moose here, but they're just super low numbers. And so they needed that was their, they needed animals that are routinely taking either woodland caribou or moose down And then they wanted a variety of different locations, so the genetics were really spread out. So they went to Canada, they went to another island in Superior and got wolves. They did the UP. I think they did a few out of northern Minnesota where there are moose.
So the moose wolf study on Isle Royale is the longest running study in the world, they say.
Yeah.
Where are you guys in the running?
The running, wow. I mean, this is our 9th year. So, yeah, we're 6th of the way there. Yeah. And that's a super cool study. We always say, though, we're really glad we're not on an island, because that's super unique there, and they can study certain things, and we can study certain things here that they can't. So it's kind of interesting, the differences there. Yeah, and we have we kind of have this almost an island here where these packs are kind of on the peninsula of the park, which is really interesting, and these packs are exclusively in a protected area, and then we have the packs on that shoreline which straddle the park border, and then we have packs in the southern part of our study area which are completely out. So we have this unique kind of triad of completely protected, partially protected, completely unprotected.
When we were here in February, there was a lone wolf that was on the road.
Well, that's October, September.
September last year.
Okay.
And
Near
it
the
was,
Ash River.
Okay.
Back and forth, and people were stopping. And
Yeah.
do you know the demise of that one?
I don't know the demise of it. My guess is it either moved on or somebody shot it, or maybe it was hit by a car. Cause I know that wolf, and it was very gullible. Something was up with it. I imagine most of it was just hungry. It was foraging for grasshoppers.
We would see it jump.
Yeah.
Go down, and we have video of it. It was pretty cool.
Which it's super cool, but it's a wolf in a pretty bad situation to be searching for grasshoppers. So my guess is it either starved to death or someone shot it or something like that.
So
Sad.
when can people shoot wolves? When they're on their property?
Nobody can shoot wolves. They're federally listed right now on the endangered species list.
So
people poach them.
Okay.
It's poaching at its in most pure sense of poaching. The only legal right now way to have a wolf killed is if it's essentially threatening livestock. A federal wildlife services. We actually work with a cattle ranch in the southern area of our study area. We've posted a fair amount about this. That it's a really 1,500 acre cattle ranch that wolves have been lethally removed for 20 plus years off of, whether or not they're on the endangered species list or not. The only difference when they're on and off the list was that either when they're on the list, a federal trapper has to go kill them. When they're off the list, the rancher can kill them himself. But nobody, even when they're off the list, there was a season in 2013 and 14. There was a wolf hunt in the state, so that's the last time it was legal to kill one. And of course, there was a hunt in Wisconsin not too long ago, and there's a lot of that was quite a show for a lot of reasons. I won't even get into it, but there's a lot of politics that go into wolf hunts, and if wolves are on and off the endangered species list. Briefly, it's basically the interpretation of if wolves need to be recovered to get off the endangered species list, and it's up for interpretation. Is recovered mean where they could be now, or where they ever were? So there were wolves in Iowa, but do you consider recovered until there's wolves back in Iowa, or if there probably isn't the habitat for wolves in Iowa now? Do you draw the line at, Grand Rapids, Minnesota, where there's actually habitat for them? So the pendulum swings back and forth between the interpretation of that rule.
Is the hunt for meat, or is it just for fur or trophy?
It's trophy and fur, really. I don't know very many people who. I don't know anyone who has eaten a wolf. I'm not saying no one would, but primarily it's a trophy hunt, and the pelts can be sold, and we're in an interesting area here where it's always been legal in Canada. It still is legal harvest, and we've had a couple of wolves wander into Canada and get shot for legal harvest. Usually they give us the collar back because
I was going to ask that.
I mean, we've also had collars outright fail. It happens occasionally where they just go off air and they blank out, and 2 years later somebody mails us the collar, which is handy. But it's, you know,
And
it's a
Yellowstone.
legal harvest.
Send them down the river.
Or someone, oftentimes, not often, but once in a while, a wolf will just get shot with just ear tags, and our project has a high enough profile now that people recognize them and at least message us.
So, you know, you said in November you cut back on the amount of monitoring. Or I know they don't hibernate, but are they less active in the winter?
Oh no, winters they get fat in the winter. That's when all the deer are slowing down. They're starving. You know, they're slowed by deep snow. So wolves actually have this kind of backwards boon time of the winters when they are slowed down by snow, but they are really active. That's when mating season is, so they're really active maintaining their territory during mating season, and they're also, you know, feeding on deer, and they slowly starve until this time of year. And when I say starve, I mean wolves are always thin animals, and they're always, you know, catching what they kill, you know, what they eat and stuff like that. So there's times they'll eat a lot of fawns in the beginning of fawn season when they first drop. They'll eat a lot of beavers at certain times of the year, but they're kind of marching towards now, which is the bottleneck. It's a pretty hard time for them.
So are you less busy?
No, I mean,
Ice.
right now even though they're killing less, they're still.
I mean, once the ice comes.
Oh, when the ice comes. Yes.
November.
Yeah, that's what we only have 2 technicians in the winter season, and that's basically just maintaining that trail camera grid, which is harder than it sounds because it's all by snowmobile and snowshoeing and that kind of stuff. And believe it or not, trail cameras don't like to work at -30. And so keeping that many cameras going is a challenge, but we have 2 snowmobiles, so we have 2 technicians.
Sorry, I'm asking so many questions. I follow this like religiously.
Sure.
When we found out we were coming here, we immediately followed. So how do you get your money then?
Good question. So our main funding source is the LCCMR, which is essentially a pool of money from Minnesota Lottery. They set aside, basically the taxpayers set aside about $60 million from lottery proceeds, and that money is earmarked for natural resources. And so we apply, you know, submit a proposal, and that's the majority of our budget. So Tom Gable's PhD was the first time we got LCCMR funding in about 2020, 2021. We got a second round, and we've just been approved again, or we've been recommended for a third cycle of that. The only thing left is basically the state Congress needs to, you know, stamp that every project that's been recommended gets the money. So right now we're in a really good standing, you know, unless something really weird happens in the legislature, that will be funded for another about 3 years.
So if I buy a lottery ticket on the way out, it's helping me.
Yes.
Yes.
They're getting 0.2 cents.
At the
so.
very least, it's helping natural resources. You know, what percentage of it goes to us? I don't know. But and then we do a lot of fundraisers. You know, like the social media one, and we have, you know, we're like I said, we're not an agency, so we don't get a dime from, you know, directly from state budgets like that. But that gives us the freedom to fundraise online and call donors and that kind of stuff, and sell sweatshirts and you know, that kind of stuff.
So do y'all have a relationship with the National Park, the Conservancy, and other organizations?
Yeah, so, you know, we kind of came out of the Park Service, so we certainly have a relationship that way. You know, formally we are permitted, we have research permits to do our research in the park. That's kind of the formal way to say it, but you know, our data kind of continued what the park was before 2015. The park was mandated because of the wolves being an endangered species in the park, that they just had to kind of monitor them. So they had, you know, collars with 6 or 12-hour collars on one wolf per pack or something like that, just so they knew how many packs were roughly in the park and where those packs were. And then 2015 it kind of ramped up to what it is now, which is through the University of Minnesota. But yeah, we work closely with the Conservancy, and Conservancy, of course, you know, is something, a project like ours that promotes this area is obviously beneficial to the Conservancy. So in the park.
If we
I'm
were
sorry,
able,
you said this. Oh, I'm sorry. At any one time, how many traps do you have out that you have to check each day?
We own 50. And we try to have, when we're in our trapping season, which is the spring, is we try to have them all going at once, just for every one of them's a chance.
Okay. And someone physically has to go check each trap every day. Okay.
And if it's over, I think it's over 85 degrees, we have to check them twice a day. And if it's below 28 degrees, we have to pull them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there human activity near the traps, or is it they're remote enough that you don't end up getting a human stuck in?
No, I mean, it's always possible. I mean, they're not like off-limit areas; they're public places, but we have them very well signed.
Okay.
It'd be hard to fit a human
There's a
foot in
trap
there.
right here.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like double signs on the beginning of trails. It's saying like there are animal capture devices behind the sign.
Okay.
You know, if
Stay
you,
on the trail?
Stay on the
well, the problem is
You
that
have
they're
them on the
baited.
trail.
They're
Oh.
baited and they're on the edge of the trail. Some of the trails, there's a dirt hole set, which is basically a bait in a hole, and you want the wolf to come and sniff the hole. And then there's blind sets, which is in the trail, which we're very selective of where we put blind sets. But yeah, we're selective of where we trap because we really don't want trouble. We don't want to catch dogs.
I mean, would it be, easy for a human to set that off, to get their foot caught in it?
To set it off, very easy. To get it, for example, we almost never can even catch a bear because their paws are too big. So like even a foot with a shoe, it'll just clamp it and you can just pull your foot right out. It's getting behind the pad of a wolf that allows us to really hold them. And then without getting too much in the details, there's a set, the distance that basically the jaws are from the pan is calibrated so that it takes a certain amount of weight to set it off so that we don't catch small animals. It takes roughly 25 pounds, which, sometimes, if a raccoon just sits on the trap or something, it will go off. But, by and large, we don't catch raccoons, foxes. It's even rare that we catch a coyote, that kind of stuff. Deer can slip right out. Bears their pads are way too big. So we try to, we've gotten very good at limiting bycatch.
So have any humans called that they were caught?
We've caught 2 dogs in the project history. Both were fine. I think we've a person or two has. Often the biggest hazard is people ride over them with ATVs. Yeah. So you can imagine if you've got 25 traps set, and someone rides down the trail with their ATV and pops them.
Doesn't give them a flat tire?
Maybe they would stop.
So with us going back, if we can get administration and principals on board with doing fundraisers, y'all are busy and I want to put more on your plate, but if that happened, would you be able to like zoom in and do a hello?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Here's some wolf information.
Yeah. We're one of our something that's important to us is that we tell people basically about the information we're doing. Not everyone can. We're set up because we're not with an agency that we can kind of say what we want about what's going on in the wolf world. And we know nobody can GPS collar a wolf. Very few people have the resources or the land to put 200 trail cameras out. So it's really important to us that we're like getting that information out there, telling it how it is. There's somewhat of a trust thing with our project and the public that we're putting it plainly, which we try to be really explicit that we are putting it plainly, which is why we post things that are not pretty, and a lot of people don't really like that. But a lot of people really do that. We're not sugarcoating it, and we're saying what we're finding, and yeah.
So yes, Robbie, you can raise money for the wolf man.
We would appreciate it.
I teach 5th grade, so a lot of what I think and say comes from thinking like a 5th grader. So this is a 5th grade boy question.
Okay.
What's in the bags? Show us what's in the
gosh.
bags. What's in the bags?
Well, these are beaver skulls.
Can I touch it? Can I hold it? Can I lick it?
You can pass this around. So you can see both. This one in particular has the back of the head bitten off because they eat the brains, and this one has the nose bitten off because that's also soft tissue. oftentimes, like I said, this is the one thing that they just don't swallow. We used to collect. The project has collected thousands of wolf scats. And we stopped doing this because it was a lot of time, but we would collect them, put the scats in knee-high nylons, and put them in a washing machine, and it washes all the fecal material away, and what you're left with is just the hair and the bones. And then you can take that, spread it on a paper plate, and identify what it ate. And so that was a big part of our early years, was basically we got weekly wolf diets by clearing the same roads of scats every week to identify what they had. But we rarely, if ever, found beaver teeth in those scats because they rarely actually consume them. We found entire deer vertebrae, but rarely these. This is a wolf skull. And the reason I bring this is partially because it's interesting to see a wolf skull, but also one of the main ways when we catch a wolf, how we age that wolf is by the teeth wear. These teeth are falling out because this is, a skull soaked in water for a long time. But the canines, and especially the front teeth, is the most consistent place of wear. So the first thing we do when we catch a wolf is, first, they bite all sorts of sticks when we catch them. So the first thing we do is to check to see if the stick is caught in the roof of the mouth, because if there is one jam there, they cannot get it out and they will die from that. So before we do anything, it's to check for that mouse stick. Once it's safe, it's a mouse stick, and then we look at the teeth and say, this is this old of a wolf, and we're starting to gauge who this wolf might be. So this wolf, that you can take a look at this, not all the teeth are left in the front, but they're very pointy and sharp, and the canines are, almost perfect, and the back molars and premolars are really pointy, so this is probably a 1 or 2 year old wolf. Actually, I know that because I know what wolf it was, but yeah, so this wolf was killed on that ranch.
So guys, there's just a few more minutes because they've got to get back to Hustler before dark. So you can lick whatever you want to in a minute. But can we just thank Austin so much for this?
Thank you guys.
Austin, if it's okay with you, we'd like to get a group photo.